Welcome to Canned with Tinnuts, and we're presenting today's session to all our viewers here on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Zoom. However, you've chosen to join us, we're grateful. Thank you for your support. I'm here with two extremely good looking and well, I would say, designed individuals and sculpted individuals to discuss getting inked and what happens each time your canvas walks out the door. We're going to be having interesting discussions with Tully, who's the director and founder of Nothing Regular Media and Entertainment, and Patange, who is the founder of Crayons Tattoo Studio and one of India's most coveted tattoo artists. And now I take this moment, guys, to welcome you. Thank you for joining us, firstly, on this show. And I'm now going to make sure that the audience can see your faces in full glory.
Hey,
Thank,
Rafa,
thank you.
congratulations and wish you all the best. And wish
Hi
you
guys.
India
Hi
and the
Rafa.
team all the best. I think it's a great initiative in the independent or the creative industries in the scene right now because definitely there's a void and requirement for such kind of, I won't put it as services. Yes, it's a part, but something more of like guiding and helping the industry. Are we on Hotgram also?
No, we're not, we're not yet. But I completely understand where you're coming from. And I think I'm of a similar opinion. I think there is a lot to be discussed, especially in that realm. But firstly, coming to that, I just want to create a canvas for our viewers
Okay.
for this discussion today. And I'd like to create that canvas by asking Samir a few questions. And those questions, don't worry, Samir, they're not tough questions. They're just they're just questions on the art of tattoos, the art of body sculpting, the art of taking ink to skin and really representing images that you have in your head onto someone's body based on a brief or based on just your creative vision. So firstly, I'd like to ask you, how do you as an artist think, and how do, maybe you can speak for the community of tattoo artists, how do you think, and what's a normal interaction, creative interaction, when a client walks into your studio and gives you a brief and says, I want you to represent this on my body?
So first of all, thanks for having me on the panel, Rafa. And going back to the question that you just asked me, there are lots of different kind of people who ideally walk into a tattoo studio on an everyday basis. And a lot of times there are three kind of people that actually walk in. You can categorize them in three categories. Whereas one being the ones who know exactly what they want, but they have a concept and they have a vague image in their heads, but because of being they're not they're a little handicapped when it comes to visualizing. So that's when we come into play. So that is one category. The second category being clients who walk into a place with a reference of something that they've seen online, which consists of the majority of the clientele that comes in. They've seen something online, they've just taken a printout, or they just put it on the hard drive and walk in.
I mean, sorry to interject, but I think there was a lag on one of our broadcasts.
Okay.
I'll just go back to one and we'll pretend that what we just did was a practice session. I'm sorry, guys. Tends to happen. But I'd like to welcome our viewers once again and welcome today's speakers, both Tully, who's the founder of Nothing Regular Media and Entertainment, and also Samir Patange, who is the founder of Crayons Tattoo and Crayons Tattoo Studios, and is one of India's leading tattoo artists and most renowned tattoo artist, if I may say so myself. You're watching Canned with Tinnuts, and in this series, we explore new age creations with new age creators, and whether there is room for intellectual property, or the role that intellectual property plays in these new age conversations, let's say. Today, we're talking about getting inked, and I just introduced speakers. Thank you for joining in through YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and on Zoom. We're happy that you're joining us. Thank you for supporting us in this week and celebrating the launch of Tinnuts. And gentlemen, this is that back to one moment. And Andre, I know your experience with those back to one moments where you think we are live on broadcast, but you're not. And now I'm confident to say that we are live on broadcast. And then
Life walking, talking broadcast. Okay, no, but congratulations, Rafa, Cynthia, and Tinnuts team. I think it's a great initiative, and definitely,
Yeah.
I think this is something which is really required, and you guys are going to help build, you know, a lot of void which was there in the creative industries in India and the space. So congratulations, and we hope to be your first lines.
thank you. I hope so too. Cynthia certainly does. And at this point, what I'd like to do is I'd like to create some sort of canvas to give our viewers an understanding of what exactly it is we're talking about, and to kind of put our viewers in the shoes. And I think when we discuss intellectual property strategy, Andre, Samir, I'd like to make this point early on. I think what really goes wrong with strategies is if strategies aren't simultaneously created from the moment of creation, or if you don't understand what space you are coming from or the background you're coming from in which that creation took its shape and expression and form, you won't really have an effective strategy. And at that point, I'd like to really bring in Samir here with his experience and opinion to give us some background on what an artist is going through when an artist thinks of a work, when a client walks through that door, briefs an artist. What is that element of creativity that comes in that entire canvas? And what is that conversation like? And how does that expression, that idea go from that conversation between a client and the artist to that expression onto a sketch or onto the client's skin? And what is that relationship between the artist once that work or that client actually walks out of the door?
Right. Thanks for having me on and Rafa. And what I would, from what you just asked me, I would like to say that you know it differs. It differs when it's someone with my number of years of experience, and if it's someone who's just about beginning in the tattoo industry or just about starting up. So I'll tell you how it works in case of an artist who, in everybody's case, let's just generalize and say that in everyone's case. So usually what happens is when a client comes into the studio, we are always anticipating there are three categories when we talk about clients coming in. One being the category of clients that actually have something in mind, but because they can't put it on paper, they have a very clear concept. They have a very clear concept of what they want to get inked. But because of the fact that they're not, very sound with visualizing and designing, they usually depend on us for that help. Whereas the second category is of client who are, who just walk into the studio with something on the hard drive, or with a print for that matter, with a hard copy of something that they've seen online and they've just liked it. So they just hell bent on getting something absolutely random. And the third category being the most painful one, where they are absolutely clueless of what they want to get done. So they'll come to us and they'll tell us that we are confused of what to get done. And then the question goes that if you're confused, how are we supposed to know what to do for you? you know and you're confusing us further onto what do we suggest to you. So that's where the confusion kind of gets double, because there are two confused parties over here. And then we usually end up telling the client that get back home, do some homework, at least put in some thought into what you exactly want to get done, and then come back. Even if you give us a cue of what exactly you're looking for, we can start visualizing and start looking at doing something for you. Whereas in the second case, where the client comes with a visual and with a printout or whatever, we usually end up, asking them to, see something that is in the same lines, but slightly better. Or we try and customize something better in those same lines that they've brought us. So that is the second category. Whereas the first category, where, the client is absolutely sure of what he wants, we usually, take some time. We usually take some time and we start visualizing and designing something for them. It's called customizing, and most of the time I end up doing a lot of customized pieces, because that's how I like working, because every piece is individual, should be individually designed. Every piece should be individually different for every client. No matter which part of the globe he goes to, it should probably be the one and only of its kind. That's the whole fact. That's the whole thing of tattooing that makes it so special. It's no point of having something that's something on you and 10 other people if you walk onto a beach. So it's like, oh man, that's like a wholesale tattoo that you've got done with others. So it's no point doing something like that. You might as well keep it separate, different. You
But
might
correct
as
me if
well.
I'm wrong, Sameer, sorry to interject, but correct me if I'm wrong. That's where I think a lot of tattoos originated, right? The flash cards, or the
Of
flash.
course, of course, of course. See, we are talking about back in the day when, we didn't have, artists weren't very creatively sound. They were, of course, very creatively sound, but they were very limited resource. There was very limited source of artists. They were very limited. There was no source of internet. Back in the day when that used to be the case, we could understand if you're multiply or getting tattoos which are being, replicated on 10 other people. That's fine. But today, when you look at today's scenario, the things have changed so much. It's kind of evolved to such a level where, Andre can also tell you about it. It's evolved to such a level, and artists have become so creatively sound and creatively good that they don't mind putting in that thought. We are waiting for someone who comes and gives us that opportunity to give us some, give our minds some trouble and work our minds a little bit. So we are waiting for those kind of people. And when you're dealing on that kind of, today the internet is a wide vast ocean. It's an ocean of creative ideas and inspirations where you can derive things from. So when you have that kind of a resource, you might as well capitalize on that, right? So when you're capitalizing on that, you're bound to always come up with something that is, different and good for every individual. And that's where I come from. As in, my take is that every individual should have something different. And when you end up doing something like that, trust me, the value of not just the tattoo, but the value of the relation between the tattoo artist as well as the client who's getting it done reaches another level. Reaches another level where the client starts appreciating the fact that you've put in so much time and effort for him.
Yeah.
And that's when he starts not only looking at you as an artist or an individual who's giving you a service, but he also starts looking at you beyond that. He also starts looking at you as a friend. He also starts looking at you as someone who he can confide in. Because the time that we have while tattooing is so
Intimate. It's some
yeah,
intimate
yeah,
kind of
intimate.
experience.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. So it's so
personal, you need to create a bond with, that's how you create a bond. Sorry, that's how you
exactly.
create a
Yeah,
bond with your
yeah.
artist.
So that intimate session that you're having with the client ends up reaching another level where the client starts sharing with you so many things that he probably might not share with his own brother. So that's how much that tattooing process is valued, and that's why I feel that it has to be made valuable, and not just something that has to be done because you're getting a few bucks at the end of the day.
Yeah.
you know so
So
that's why.
that's great. And in review, I think you've set those three buckets, and I'm going to come back to those three buckets with three different
Right,
solutions for each of those
right,
buckets, or frame IP in each of those buckets,
right.
depending on the client brief. But I'd like to come to Andre here, and Sameer referenced you in the conversation also, and I think Andre, what I'd like to gain from you is an understanding of how far we've come as the industry in India. So dating back to the flash books or flash cards that you would take and put onto your body, you've produced Heartwork Tattoo Festival, which is the country's largest tattoo festival and international convention in India, and celebrating 5 years last year. You've seen, I mean, artists from all over the country come congregate for 3 days, and you've seen international artists mingle with them. How far in that timeline do you think we are? Are you still seeing um, replica or a lot of copying, a lot of works that artists claim as inspiration from other artists and then are putting on other people's bodies? What is the current scenario and landscape currently?
Uh, See, well, it's like the music industry. When you started off 20 years back, as Samir said, there was no internet, or you like, oh man, if you were in the scene, you really needed to, get your music or get your, stock to be playing around. Same way with like the tattoo scene, you really needed to, you would get inspired by work or by seeing stuff. But yeah, the tools are available today to, to the youth, and I would say, use them wisely. It's all available. Take inspiration from, the people that have been doing it for the last 20 years. I've been grinding. Take inspiration from them. But, Samir has always taught me, and always, that's what's been keeping me going and motivated, is that be original in your work. Take inspiration, but be original. And what we are seeing through hard work or through a tattoo convention is that, creating the boundaries or creating the benchmark, of being original through competitions. When you say, okay, you have to compete, you have to be a part of the competition, then you have to be original, and your work should be original. So it's coming up. It's not a very mainstream. It's not been a very mainstream, but yeah, fortunately, in the last 10 years, and especially in the rapid growth in the last 5 years, is where you see a lot of more, you know, people wanting to come get tattooed and want to have something that they can call the identity.
Yeah. And specifically speaking to that, Samir, could you give us a sense of what is the concept of the understanding of originality that artists have in the industry today, and how far is copying or inspiration, what artists claim as inspiration, permissible within the community? I'm not talking about by law, but I'm saying if someone rips off your work or does a take on your work, pays homage to your work, how far is that permissible, or what's that kind of golden line that they should not cross?
Well, uh, these kind of things, Rafa, they keep happening in this kind of industry. In the creative industry, it's bound to happen. But there is a way where it's ethically done and non-ethically done. There are two ways. Again, now if you ask me, there have been times when I have copied somebody else's work, and it has happened. Let me be very realistic and true to what my facts are, my roots are. And the only difference has been that when I have copied someone's work, I have made it a point that I reach out to the original artist. I reach out to the original artist, send him the job that needs to be done, and I will ask him for a consent. So that consent is the key to being, whether you want to, copy it or whether you want to be original. It's definitely, if the artist gives you the consent that, okay, fine, it's great, go ahead, do it, credit me on it, nothing like it, But the problem is that a lot of artists today, because the influx of artists has happened so much in the recent times, not everybody comes from the same school of ethics,
So,
you know so a lot of, in return, what happens is a lot of people end up crossing that line which we are talking about, of copying without consent. So and that's where it kind of gets a little mucky, and that's something that I feel should be avoided. And be true to your roots. It doesn't matter. More than that, I would say, just be original, just be yourself. It doesn't matter, for the first few years you might probably come up with crappy work, but that gives you an opportunity to cover it up in the next few years when you become extremely good, so that also challenges your creativity in future.
and by that, do you mean if you do yucky work for the first few years, you can contact your clients for repeat business to do cover up work in the following years?
See, like I said in the first point, if you
That was
create that bond with your client,
that was
if you
but
make it clear with the client that I'm trying to be as original as possible, if later on you don't like it, let me know. We can always change it back to something else. Then of course the client is always going to end up coming to you. That's called being honest to the client of where you're coming from.
Yeah.
But if you're, of course, the client wants you to copy somebody's work, then I suggest that you reach out to the original artist and speak to the artist regarding the same.
Yeah.
And if the artist gives you the permission, nothing like it. If he doesn't give you the permission, then I suggest you do something, get inspired, and try and do something in those lines for the client who's looking for something like that.
Understood. Now
See,
I'd like
that's
to
where, Rafa, where the trust and the bond comes into place is, because tattooing is not, see, it's not a sketch or a fine art where, you can use an eraser to erase it out and then re-sketch it or redraw it. This is on your skin, right? So you have to trust your artist and you take him as a friend and you have that bonding with him that in case you don't like it or you're not satisfied with it, you have to trust your artist to, maybe rework on it or there are going to be mistakes. Everybody's human, so you may not, you may not have visualized what you actually thought or want, and at the end of the tattoo, you may say, "Oh man, but this is not come out the way I thought." Then the artist will help you because that's the bond you share with him. You have to understand that there is margin for error.
That's a very interesting point, and I think when you use the word mistake and you put it in the context of this is a permanent mistake, I want to bring that into a different light, but a bit later. First, I'd like to understand from Samir, what's your relationship? You've explained, both of you have spoken about this relationship of trust between you and the artist and really how there is that strong bond. But I'd like to understand a bit more about that relationship between you and the artwork. I think in some cases, if it's a small artwork or some of the artworks you would have created early on in your career, once they've walked out that studio door, you've never seen them again, or you don't know where they are and how they're doing today.
Uh, See, Rafa, as an artist, I'll tell you, we on an everyday basis churn out new designs. You cannot have an emotional connect with your artwork that you're doing. It's not like you're doing something on, uh, a canvas which you can always gaze at, or you can of course, you click a picture of the tattoos that you do as well. But when you're doing something or designing something, you're actually being emotional about for the person who's getting it done. You got to put yourself in his shoe and think about if he's going to like it for the rest of his life, because he's the carrier, right? So your emotional connect is with the carrier and not with the artwork.
All
The
right.
artwork is something that you're going to do as an award or as a reward for the carrier, and you never get connected to rewards, emotionally.
Wow.
So of course, it's you always, every artwork is special. You put in everything to, to create an artwork as an artist, but you never get connected to it because that's your, at the end of the day, that's your job. You got to make somebody else happy. So you got to be more connected to that person rather than the art that you're creating.
So can I say in, or I get the sense that it's a hybrid between being an artist and a craftsman in a
Right.
particular way, because you're also aiming for perfection in every stroke. You're also aiming for a recreation of a technique in the smoothest possible way. And also, I'd like to think with every piece, you're also getting better and better towards your ultimate goal.
Right.
Um, but and here is where I'd like to bring in that question of Andre spoke about mistakes, right? And till rather recently, the only way you could cover up mistakes is by getting them covered up by other artists or covering them up with bigger, larger, or uniquely um, covering up tattoos. So in in recent times, there has been laser therapy. There has been other instruments that have been devised to help you take off those tattoos. And I'm just curious to understand what's your sentiment there. How do you feel when now you can take off tattoos through laser treatment of your body, and some of those works may be taken off in the course of time?
Samir, you want to answer that?
See, I would speak as an artist. Why don't you speak as someone who has tattoos on them and who's a collector more than a tattoo artist?
Yeah.
Well, I think laser is good for the industry because it gives you an opportunity to, maybe um, get more tattoos done. Okay, you can say, okay, I've had this canvas, I've had this art on myself for like 10 years, and now there's laser available where I want to get an art piece done by Samir, and when I go to Samir, he says like, listen, man, like you should really go and get lasered 1 or 2 times and come back, and then I'll be able to create the art on you. So I think it's good for the industry, and it creates more opportunity.
Wow, so far I'm really surprised with the last two answers that I've received. One is you mentioned that your connection is more with the canvas than the art. And secondly, you are taking what in other industries they would consider a negative connotation, and you're seeing something positive in it, as in it's creating more room for you to create
Of
more
course.
work.
Yeah.
That's great. And now I'll come to those buckets. Andre, I think you had some examples of where even Samir's work has been taken on and used in the industry without due credit, and some of the norms and the current landscape that you feel need to be improved on. Could you elaborate a bit more on that?
Well, see, tattooing is, it comes with a lot of background with it, or a lot of weight with it. Like, I mean, it's sacred, it's sentimental, and then uh, it's also respect to the person that's putting that art on you. So the only thing, the most important thing that I see there, which Samir has already spoken about, is actually being ethical to yourself, and having the right practices and the ethics when you get into a profession, which is a creative industry profession like tattooing.
Mhm.
The least that you can do is, they're all good fellows. The least that you can do is ask, and you shall receive.
So, are you saying that the community is small enough that you're able to reach out to every artist or the artists who inspire you? Is it something that you can send them a direct message on Instagram and they'll probably reply and say, "Hey, man, go ahead and make it better," or just give us a sense of
See,
what?
thanks to technology available today and social media, that you can actually use this platform to go and Google and search, and every artist will be on some platform, right? Taking it 10 years back, 15 years back, when somebody would want to copy a Samir Patange work, it would now come up after 5 years. Maybe it would take you 5 years to see somebody posting his tattoo. And then you see like, oh man, but this is already done by Samir or another artist.
Yeah.
But today, thanks to technology, and you should use it in the right way, and social media, is that it's very easy to get in touch with anybody, and especially artists that will have a social media platform that, you should first go and check, do your reference check, do your background check, and if you're an artist doing your stuff, you should know which art form is, definitely which artist. Is like music also, right? You should,
Hmm.
you will check that, oh man, let me just check, because it's not created by you, it's somebody that's come with a reference to say, I want this.
Yes.
If I leave, it open to you to say that, man, I have this idea and I want you to design it.
Mhm.
But if I come with a wolf and say, I want this, then you should definitely do your background check. And then the basic thing you can do is have ethics, the right practices to check your background, and then check with the artist, like, is it okay to use, just as a photographer, for photograph that you would use, you'll first check its background and then use it, or any other design. and the least is to give credit to the artist or the creator.
Understood. So what I'm going to do now for both of you is, and tell me if this makes sense, is Samir put clients into three types or briefs into three types of categories. And to me, I'm going to try and take that into the existing IP framework. And this is what you, um, to answer some of your questions, Andre, is so firstly, in the first case, when a client comes with a full brief and they're really saying, I this is my brief to you, but my brief is quite generic in nature. And when I say generic, it's quite thematic, or let's not say generic, but quite thematic. I have this theme, I have this idea, and I'd like you to represent it in this format on this part of my body. What's really happening there is, I think all the conversations with which tattoo artists are having with their clients is understanding that background and understanding that brief. But beyond that, it's not happening at a level of ownership, or it's not happening at a level of use, terms of service, which we have seen in, frameworks where brands or companies or artists really want to enforce their IP. So if that is the way forward, and I'm not saying that it is, I'm not saying that's the way it should be, but I'm merely saying in the first bucket or the first option, what really would tend to happen there is you as an artist, Samir, and the client who's briefing you, you'd essentially be a co-author in that work with that client. So based on those themes, based on that idea and that conceptualization, or the way that client is expressed, I don't know if many clients kind of send it to you on WhatsApp or send it to you on email and kind of express their idea, and that expression is what you then take and further express on that format of that skin as a canvas. I'd like to claim that you are a co-author in every work that you're creating. So what that co-authorship entails, and I'd get into that um, a little further on.
I have a few questions for you.
But in the second part, or the second scenario, where your client comes in and just brings in a printout and says, I want you to do this on my body, and that brings up works of realism, and that brings up a lot of IP questions. Can you be a co-author in that question? Because firstly, you're recreating something that already exists, and let's say stroke by stroke or pixel by pixel. It's just that you're doing this on a different format, whether it was a paper earlier or a photograph earlier. You're now taking that and creating it on pore by pore, and pixel by pixel. So in that case, really, I mean, certain questions would come up down the line. And when there are tattoo shops known specifically for just doing brand logos on people, I was on a call on Sunday when we were celebrating World IP Day. I was on a webinar with students from my law school, and one of them I gave them this example of how tattoo artists influence each other. There is a certain circle of power within the tattoo community where the senior artists are influential and can influence other artists in the community, through just because they have so many followers and they have that clout. So if a senior artist says, don't copy or don't create works in this way, or take a work and make it unique or create your signature style, junior artists will want to do that and will go on that path. So there is that norms based kind of influence there. And what one of the students asked is, can the tattoo artist be sued for creating that Adidas logo or a McDonald's logo on someone's body? And my answer to that was, in the first place, and maybe this is relevant to you also, is to a certain extent you're covered under fair dealing, because that comes in with a brief that the client's giving you, and you're expected to perform on the basis of that brief. Now, that's not for a commercial purpose or a commercial display. It would be very different, and where if a brand ambassador for a company were to come in to your studio and say, I want you to create this work on me, and then is going to display it on an ad film or in some form of cinema or in some fixated form that will be broadcast, telecast, or published.
Right.
So that's the second bucket for you. And now I know, Andre, if you had 10 questions for the first answer of mine, you have 20 questions now. But I'd like to come to the third bucket. And the third bucket, I think, is purely based on your inspiration, Samir, where the brief is so vague, where they just say, in some case, I remember a time where you and Andre went to a convention. I don't know if it was the Beijing Expo or it was the Golden State Expo. Andre then came back with a calf covered in Darth Vader, I think it was, and he came back telling me,
That
I have
was the Philippines one.
Philippines. Yeah, I think the Dutan convention. And by the time I got there, there was Darth Vader on one leg. And I was like, when did this happen? And I think, Andre, your statement to me was, um, we were just sitting there, and somebody said, "Okay, let me give me your calf and let me create this expression on you." And I think in that scenario, you are the sole author, the first owner, because you took that form into a sketch. And I think what viewers need to understand is there is also a sketch that is prepared um, on paper before, or tracing paper before, and it may not be the entire sketch, but at least the outline is prepared. So that idea is kind of fixated in that
Right.
form of a sketch before, and then it is translated onto that body as a canvas. So this is how I'd like to claim, and this is how I'd segment those three clients. I don't know if you're really
You know,
happy with it, Samir, but
exactly, that's how I believe in, and that's how the industry should be, or that's how clients should be, or anybody get that tattooed. The belief is that it should be that the artist owns the art,
yeah.
okay, and the IP to it. I am just carrying it. I'm a carrier.
So,
I'm the canvas. I wear the art, but it's not owned by me. This is his creation.
so I'm going to take this opportunity now to recap, review, and summarize through two examples. And I think one, you have to move from, I take this with a pinch of salt, move from a kind of informal conversation to a model of license,
Mhm.
where you are licensing that work. It may be in perpetuity, but for that form, in perpetuity, you are licensing that work to your client to put it on their body and for them to carry it and display it,
Right.
and for their personal benefit, whether they'd like to brag about it with their friends and family, or whether they'd like to put up a picture on social media. But what you're not doing is giving them that license to go out and monetize that work that they've created on that body. So if they're going
Mhm.
into an ad film and taking that work in there, and the role calls for a uniquely tattooed um man or woman, that's not what you're permitting them by giving them that license to do. I would also say you should consider, in the case of licensing out certain works, maybe it's an
Mhm.
additional stream of revenue,
Right.
but certain
Right.
popular works, like I've seen amazing works of realism,
Mm.
that
Right.
some artists, Andre showed me. I think some of the most popular ones today, works of realism that are on Instagram, are portraits of Kobe Bryant and his daughter
Right.
being put
Right.
on
Right.
people's shoulders or chests, and places of public viewing. And I think it's at a certain level, brands, if you're recreating their logos or a campaign or a hashtag, would really be one. I've seen brands like Nike and Adidas get really involved, or even Red Bull to an extent, get involved in street culture, where they'd like to have that kind of art associated or represented through their brand. um,
Mm.
and that's where a license really helps. And
Right.
there have been examples of artists who've enforced all these principles of originality, don't copy my work, all of that, or they don't really enforce against a client, but artists would definitely want to enforce against a brand or a third party infringing on that relationship, coming in and taking that work and putting it for the purpose of merchandising and generating revenue out of that work. And very quickly, I'll give you an example of what I think the industry needs to think of, and artists need to think of, as moral rights, which is where that work can be represented and the environment in which it can be represented, and the
Mm.
credit that has to be given to an artist in a digital age, and how that artwork has to carry along with it that artist. Like Andre said, it may take 5 years for um, an artwork that you did in the 90s, let's say, Samir, to come out to the digital age today. But maybe the infringing work comes out faster. It shows up on Instagram
Much,
faster,
yeah.
yeah, much quicker. And I'd like to give you the example of the Raging Bull in New York. And if you've seen the Raging Bull in the financial district in New York, um,
Wonderful.
it after 9/11, they had also put another sculpture in front of that Raging Bull, which was called Fearless Girl, if I'm not mistaken. And what Fearless Girl represented was that as a nation, we don't fear anything anymore. And you know what the artist who created the Raging
The
Bull
creator.
um, did? He said that this fearless girl does not receive her power and does not receive that abstract sense, or that does not is not a complete concept without the Raging Bull in front of that girl. So if you take that fearless girl out of the financial district in New York and you just place it in, let's say, Battery Park, um, it doesn't have the same sense and symbolism as it does putting it in front of the Raging Bull. So, in a sense, the fearless girl is deriving her power from that Raging Bull. And the creator of the Raging Bull was able to enforce and make sure that they took out Fearless Girl from in front of the Raging Bull, and the city of New York had to concede and remove the Fearless Girl sculpture from the financial district, because he had and given this work through a license on loan to the city of New York. And through that license, he was able to dictate the surroundings in which that bull was put, and the surroundings in which that bull is perceived um, and portrayed. So maybe this example gives you a sense of where we need to go as an industry in enforcing licenses, or even if they're implicit licenses. It's just about a short conversation. Hey, you know what? This is only for your body, and if there is you're thinking of monetizing this work, it needs to be done with my consent. And also, wherever you feature this work apart from your body, it needs to be done with due credit given to me. So those are my suggestions in a nutshell. I don't know if you have any questions for me there, but I know you have to run, Samir, because you've got live sessions of your own on the Crayon Studio Instagram page today. And for those of you who are viewing in, make sure you tune into Samir's Instagram live sessions, and he's doing it with some of the world's most renowned artists, and it's really great collaborative spirit and great conversations happening there.
Honestly, I would have loved to be a part of this a little more. If probably would have taken this a little slightly earlier, we could have probably spent a lot more time. And it's a very interesting topic to discuss a lot on.
Yeah.
And it's just that, I'm dealing with time zones which are probably, Indian time zone and, UK time zone and then American time zone. So it kind of gets a little difficult for me to, I probably might have to run. But I would definitely want you to take another session where we could probably talk more about this, because this is such an interesting topic to discuss.
Sure. And I'd love to do that anytime. And I think, like Andre said, there has to be that education, and there has to be that moral code created for the community.
Absolutely.
I'm more than happy to do that at any point. And at this note, I'd like to thank both of you. Thank you, Andre. Thank you, Samir.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Rafa, for having us. And I think it's like we've not even, it's like Samir said, we've just about touched on the point.
Yeah, we've not even scraped the surface, trust me.
It's a great discussion to carry on and
absolutely
learn from. But I had a few questions for you. If you could do that on the rapid fire, would be good. A few, to start with was like to understand that, what are the current laws in America? I know it's becoming mainstream, and 2015-16 is when a few laws came in because of, people wanting to have ownership of their work, which happened,
Andre, Andre, can I disconnect if
Sure,
it's
sure. Samir, thank you for
yeah?
joining us today. Thank you for addressing all our viewers. And
Hey, no problem, man. Like I said, I would love to speak more on this. It's just that I have someone who's been calling me, and I need to attend to him as well because I'm going on with a session with him right now.
all
Yeah.
the best. All the best, Samir. Have a
Thanks. I will see you. I'll see you out there if you can drop by.
Be joining you there soon.
Yeah, join me there. Yeah. I'll see you guys.
all right. See you
Thanks,
guys.
guys. Bye.
Okay. Yeah, we do this again.
All right. For our viewers, this is Canned with Tinnuts, and we're still in conversation with Andre Tully, who's the founder of Nothing Regular Media and Entertainment. And today we're discussing getting inked. We just heard some wonderful insight from Samir Patange, who is the founder of Crayons Tattoo Studios, based in Mumbai, one of India's most renowned tattoo artists. The conversation continues, but at this point, I'm getting a lot of rapid fire questions, and you can see me perspiring right now. I'm getting ready to answer some of Andre's questions, and I know he's going to grill me, but I think I'm prepared.
No way. No, it's actually knowledge for us also to know in the industry, in this sector, in this creative sector, wherein what are the existing laws of in tattooing in India currently right now?
So, Andre, let me put it this way: if you look at the intellectual property statutes, um, very overarching, and they're not really industry specific. I mean, although some of them do allude to the type of work or address and define types of works, they don't really define industries as a whole, or where they have referred to industries or formats. It has been because of the international conventions that kind of made the Indian Parliament and legislature make those amendments and kind of give effect to the conventions that were signed by India, and so that they could ratify those conventions and make those amendments and bring these laws up to speed in India. So I won't be vague about it. The laws that I'm talking about really come um, range from trademark,
Mhm.
copyright, and design. And the first being copyright. So when I spoke about that works of joint authorship, commissioned works, work for hire, that arises out of copyright. And who
No.
is an author, who is a first owner, that's well defined in the Copyright Act. The the in essence, it becomes hazy when those conversations are kind of oral, um, and there is no written documentation or format of whether it was a work for hire, whether
That's why Tinnuts are there to create the document, right? And create those guidelines for the industry. Okay. Because see, this all leads into the next question, the next, which is basically when we say what are the current laws, but then and so what right does a tattoo artist have to the ink on a client's skin?
all right. So pertinent question. The right in my first example, when I said the right that the artist has in in the form of a work of co-authorship or joint authorship is, for example, if you're adapting that work, you're translating that work. I think this would also attract cover-ups, because when you're covering that work with another work, also, here's the pertinent question, Andre. If I've done a work on your body without a complete brief or with just a theme that you've given me, do I own that square centimeter or square inch of that skin that I've created that work on? So that firstly, that ownership of canvas comes in, and really, you need to get to the crux of it and see, because I'm framing it and I'm claiming that these artists are joint authors in that work. For someone to cover up that work, they would require the permission of the artist who had originally created that work before they cover it up. And I know there will be arguments, and I'm opening myself up here for IP evangelists and lawyers all over the world to come at me. But at this point, I think it's a conversation that needs to be had. And the reason I claim that it is so is because I believe in the first case, you are kind of licensing out that canvas and you are saying, I want this to be your canvas. to an artist. And then when that artist creates his work, he's not really owning that canvas, but he is owning that artwork. And if it has it, if it is to be further represented in other forms or in other mediums, that author, the joint author, if you are a joint author, it gives you the right to dictate how and where that work is translated, adapted, or fixed, or in the future.
Yeah,
So
it's actually happened. It's not a very common practice now in terms of the future. I don't see it. I don't see a lot of cover-ups happening in the future because this has actually happened from tattoos that you've got done 10, 15, 20 years back when, it was just a scene,
yeah.
challenging yourself, getting drunk, getting thrashed. Okay, let's get a tattoo done. You got a tattoo done, and then you realize 10 years down the line that, oh shit, this is not what I wanted my body to say or to speak, because it's your tattoo also speaks, for you. And then you said that, okay, man, I think I need a cover up. So it's mainly old tattoos that are getting covered up. But in the future, I really don't see, because it's a good amount of awareness, and people are taking the tattoos seriously now. Researching, thinking what they want, and then going and expressing themselves.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is the consumer has become more
Aware.
aware and informed. But I think there also needs to be that conversation, so that awareness on this level of ownership, of credit, moral rights. There has to be that awareness also. But I don't think you can place the burden, Andre, on the consumer to make themselves aware. So therefore, it is the studio artist owners and creators' burden to carry of awareness and education. And so it also would help if they have this conversation every time um, a client walks, or just before they walk out the door. So on that note, I
I
think
agree with you. But I also see what happens is, like, let's take an example of like saying, okay, there are certain characters or certain, design that you want, of saying, okay, I want a Shiva, or I want Om, or I want some text written. And then you realize, like, okay, the artist did his best, but maybe it was too small or something that I couldn't afford at that time. And now I want a bigger one, so I would, like to go for a full cover up.
yeah.
So it's also from person to person, or what you. But yeah, it has become, interesting now that people are actually doing a little research and thinking before they come and get inked.
Yeah. And
Now, okay, my other questions to you.
yeah, go ahead.
Basically,
Fire.
coming to this, see, it's been where artists have seen their work being copied or being redone, and how do you how does someone protect themselves? How does an artist protect himself from these you know
So
practices?
so firstly, Andre, you have to explore it from the bucket that particular artwork is in. And I think you would have to do an exercise of archiving and serialing every work that you have done as an artist. Um, because, like I said earlier, some of them, I'm pretty sure some of those works, because if in a studio there are 10 works being done every day, you're not going to be able to keep track of those works. So I know artists keep digital track of them now by taking photographs and keeping them on their phone, and then they create thumbnails on Instagram, and that acts like a virtual archive. But I think also some process of keeping those archives within your studio will kind of help you to say, okay, on this date and time, I created this work. So what that's really important, and why that's important, is from a point of view of copyright. Because to say that I created this work first is to say that you were the first creator, the first owner, and that copyright rests in you, and that work created thereafter is an infringing work. So otherwise you'll get into this whole loop of who created the work, who owns the work, and not and if it's in, let's say, the second bucket, which is the work done based on a printout brought into the studio, you can't really go out and say that this artist copied my work, because it is work based on a very particular set brief or a pictorial representation that already exists, an expression that already exists. What you're doing is just you're adapting that expression onto this particular canvas, and on this format. So it's really in the first bucket where the artist is the co-author, and in the third bucket where the artist is the sole author, where this kind of, you can claim ownership or you can enforce against another artist. But I'll give you an example where in the US, it's really where in the US and in Germany, artists are really enforcing this through norms. They're not really using the law. I mean, although the law does exist, but and it's surprising, Andre, because let's say in India, I mean, there are multiple reasons. Like on Monday, we were speaking with Akash. Yesterday, we were speaking with Pranav, and they said, the judiciary is really burdened. It will be eons before justice is actually served. But even in Germany, where you and the US, you can have quick injunctive relief, and you can see that your enforcement is done quickly. Artists have chosen to enforce uh, through norms rather than through the law. And what that means is, through this circle of influence that I've referenced to earlier, they have, the senior artists have come down and said, no, I wouldn't consider this artist to be a renowned artist or an artist of high repute, because it's not, he or she is not an artist of a high moral code, ethical values, and they're not a creator in the true sense, or they're not creative, and they kind of create um, that that sense of that understanding, or they dispute the fact that you can be creative for a client. And I think that's what hurts uh, the artist the most, that scar on their reputation, that scratch their mark on their reputation, that will really hurt their clientele, you know.
Yeah, I mean, creative industry has a lot of ego when it comes to saying this is mine, I have created this. But you've always taken reference points,
Yeah.
you know, from any source. Like, you have taken reference points. So that also, puts my next question, which says, like, yeah, what precautions should an artist take before he, starts a job, or before he actually gets down to putting that, as you say, pen to paper, but actually start inking? What are the precautions that you should take?
So more than precautions, I would say, if you create it as a process, I think artists all over the world have a process for bookings and for finance already.
Oh, yeah.
So you pay in advance, you book your time slot, and then only then will an artist prepare a sketch, and then will they start discussing that work with you. Correct me if I'm wrong. What artists also do is, whether it is a white log or a black log, they do keep records of payments made, and in some sort of a formalized ledger that exists. So they are documenting payments made to works.
Mhm.
What I would say needs to come in as a process is that added element of, on this date I did this work for this client. And today it's much easier to have as a virtual archive, where you can click photographs and just keep attaching that to kind of or annexing that to invoices, so that you know that this was the client that you created it for, this was the brief that you came in, you can attach it as a Word document or a small note or a message, and this is the invoice, this is what was charged. And you can also, there allows you the room to put it in that particular category of 1, 2, and 3, and then attach the work. So that's the process I would say every artist needs to go out and incorporate into their day-to-day lives.
Yep. So, okay, that brings me to, I mean, my last question for today. But yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting one, because we should take this forward and dig deep dive deep into it and, dig out more, solutions for, I think, for the sector is actually to, how does your, it's a great initiative that you guys have started, and it helps a lot of independent creative creators, to streamline the problems that they face back end. So how do you see a guideline, you know, coming together where we can have, or we should have, a guideline to the best practices or the ethical best practices of, the industry?
So that's a tricky question to answer because Ante, that answer changes depending on the stage you're at. So for now, I would say the from what I've heard from you and Samir of the landscape of the tattoo industry in India, I would say it first begins through this kind of circle of influence of norms, where the senior artists have an influence on um, the junior artists and kind of influence them not only with the best practices but like on a moral code. And I know there have been examples where uh, artists even in the tattoo industry, and I remember you telling me, correct me if I'm wrong, but artists have lost work if they have been there have been sexual harassment allegations against them, or if they've cheated other artists or ripped off other artists work. So first it starts through this community of tattoo artists, and it isn't such a huge community. I think at this point it is a community where you can reach out to other studios and you can reach out to other artists, and every time a new studio pops up. But moving forward, when it comes to, and now I think there have been tattoo academies that have come up in India that are churning out and doing courses, 6-month courses, 12-month diplomas on how to be a tattoo artist or tattoo diploma. That's when it's moving towards you're organizing yourself as an industry, and that's when you need to come together and formalize, put in the framework for how you're going to enforce these norms thereon. Because after a point, you, if say 20 or 30 students are graduating out of these batches, out of these schools every 3 months, um, you're not going to, there's going to come a point where it'll be difficult for you to know every single tattoo artist that exists or is coming out into the country.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
yeah, and at that point is when you need to move on to the next world of influencing control through brands. And like you're wearing a Bishop Tattoo Supply hat today, and I think you're also wearing the hoodie. I couldn't see it properly, but
Oh,
or the t-shirt. Um, when endorsements come for the leading tattoo artists, that's when brands can also enforce this moral code. So if you have certain allegations against you of copying, of harassment, of cheating clients or cheating other artists, you cannot be associated with us as a brand. That's
those already, those practices or those ethics already there in place. Like, it's called the Bishop family. So they have certain guidelines and certain, um, certain ways that they would pick an artist to be a part of the Bishop family. Other brands would have their own, pro teams and selecting artists. But yeah, they are the norms and, ethics or guidelines that they have in place to go.
and I think finally then you come to the stage of, and that's why I said this answer changes at multiple points. Finally you come to the stage of coming together into a formal body of people, body of individuals, association of persons, society, a union, whatever you'd like to call it, and all those kind of avenues exist for you as a community today. You'll come to this stage where you can, through those memorandum of articles or the articles of association, those constitutions of a union, you can go out and influence or sorry, enforce against your members that constitution that you create. And that's the stage, or that's the ultimate stage that you will be going uh, towards. And don't expect that a sector specific law is going to be created for this industry, because it won't. If you look at if you look at Bollywood as an industry, Andre, Bollywood as an industry today is recognized as an industry only for purposes of finance. In terms of labor, they're still fighting for, I mean, recognition, to be recognized as an industry, and have all those various labor code and labor laws applicable to them. And I'll give you the example of Sinta. Those artists came together and now have influence as a body of artists together, that they can enforce all other stakeholders in the industry to adopt best practices or adopt the basic necessities that they need as artists in that industry to be made available to them every day that they step out onto a set or onto a shoot.
True. So it's like, what I say is that, like, till it becomes mainstream,
Mhm.
you know, once it becomes mainstream, once anything becomes mainstream, there will be certain laws and, rules to go by, right? If you're mainstream. But right now, the independent creative industries, and if you take tattoo as a subject, it's not mainstream. But yes, in India, if you take Nepal, they've created a huge community out of it, and people are bold and aggressive to go and get tattooed and get big tattoos done and show. But there's also a community-based, exercise that they do, or they work on.
Mhm.
So where I see all these things happening is that, like, yeah, as you said, association is good for the community, and you bring out the best practices and guidelines to it. But in community, uh, what I see in the creative sector is that we all trying to build, or everybody's trying to run towards the goal in community, in creative industries, but nobody's trying to actually come together of what is the larger picture, the larger focus of a community.
Yeah.
And seeing today's, taking today's example of where we are all, in this together. Everybody is sitting home, okay, it's great to say, keep practicing your skills, but money is not flowing for anybody. The revenue is not flowing. People have to survive. Now that should also become a part of the community practices, or, wherein we come together. As when you have a community, then you think of all these angles. But what we've been doing,
I agree. And on that note, I think that's the point where we should leave this conversation and go further, deeper into it, and explore the additional layers, with maybe with Samir and a few other artists, where we can actually pick their minds and come up with some sort of understanding of how this could go forward. But for now, thank you so much, Andre.
we have to make that happen.
Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your time. Thank you to Samir once again, and shout out to him. Um, where we've been in conversation with Samir Patange, the founder of Crayons Tattoo Studios in Mumbai, and Andre Tully, the founder and director of Nothing Regular Media and Entertainment. And this is Canned with Tinnuts. Today we've been discussing getting inked, and specifically we focused and addressed what happens when your canvas walks out your studio door. And I think we've got quite a few answers, and more than answers, we've got quite a few questions. But that's exactly what we're aiming for with this series. We're trying to get you to start asking those questions, and then we'll make some room for those answers. And at that point, I'd like to share with you exactly where we're headed next, and what we're doing tomorrow. We've got a great session with Steve Vesokar, where we're going to be discussing mirroring looks. Elton's the art director of Hair Masters Bandra, and also the Vela India Color Wave Ambassador and Master Color Expert for India. And that's happening at 6 p.m. tomorrow, again on Zoom, on Instagram Live, Facebook Live, and on YouTube. We look forward to having all of you there. Thank you once again to all of you tuning in, and thank you to our speakers.
Thank you, Rafa. Thank you, Tinnuts. All the best. And these are really interesting subjects. So we're going to follow you guys and keep getting on to the live sessions.
Thanks.
Thank you.